You're listening to Inclusive AF with Jackie Clayton and Katie Van Horn.
All right, Jackie, hello.
Hello, how are you doing? Thanks for saying my name, Katie. See, look, we're just getting it all spicy. We're changing it all up.
Yeah, mixing it all up over here. And thank you for saying my name. So this is the Inclusive AF podcast, and it is a beautiful cloudy Wednesday in Arizona. How's
I'm
Texas
just
today?
glad you're there. I'm glad you're home. Welcome
True.
home. Katie
Yes.
was stuck in the airport this weekend, and I was really nervous. We are besties, so we share a location, and I just kept saying, "Oh my gosh, she is still at the freaking Philly airport." I was like, "Are you
Yeah.
ever leaving?"
No. I was in a lounge though, and so there were a couple other folks that were sitting in that lounge for a very long time as well. So I got to see some very entertaining things. So if nothing else, it was a very entertaining weekend. A lot of people watching going on. So Jackie, I'm also glad to be home. So for those of you who do not follow Jackie on the socials, I just want you to know that my friend Jackie is kind of a badass. She's a true runner now and running
Yes.
today, or trying to get some money together for ALS research. So we will put a link in the show notes. So if you are interested in donating to Jackie, we'll let you do that and would ask for any donations there. So yeah, you're a runner.
I know. I'm like dropping up groups. I'm joining running groups. I'm like drinking water with lemon in it. I'm being all cute and stuff. It's happening. It's real.
Happening. I love it. I love it. All right. Well, let's just jump right in. So we have a phenomenal guest today. I want to turn it over to her so she can introduce herself, and then we will have some conversations all about Cheryl. So Cheryl, would love for you to introduce yourself to our guests.
Oh, you're nice. Well, I appreciate Katie and Jackie. Thank you for having me. My name is Sheryl Daija. I am the founder and CEO of Bridge. Bridge is the first independent DE&I trade group for the global marketing industry. And I guess our mission is to help companies operationalize inclusion as a business practice for growth. So that's who I am.
Awesome. Very cool. So when you think about kind of the typical client that you're working with, what are they looking for? What do you do for them?
Yeah, so we are, as an industry trade group, we have the kind of unique opportunity to actually bring the entire industry together. So we are a membership-driven organization. So we're not necessarily an agency with clients, but rather an industry group that, kind of coalesces and brings together members. So our members are, and if you if you look at the Bridge board, the companies and the individuals are comprised of Fortune 500 companies, agencies, media platforms, and then obviously, we have a number of different a number of different brands. And then specifically in terms of the individuals, we have a combination of chief diversity officers or chief D&I officers, CMOs, chief marketing officers, and then CEOs. So we fundamentally believe that the change needs to happen at the intersection of DE&I and business. We're very focused on inclusion, for business growth. Obviously, there's a moral imperative to it all, but our kind of focus is on the business imperative. And so we help companies with basically developing best practices for being able to operationalize inclusion. We have a tool that allows companies to actually measure their inclusion maturity across their organization. So we're focused both on the workplace and on the marketplace because, obviously D&I has had a big focus is on talent and what your organization kind of comprises and looks like. We fundamentally believe that DE&I and inclusion in the marketplace is as essential. So how are you, developing your products? How are you showing up in the marketplace, et cetera?
Well, I wanted to ask you a question. Our listeners know that I'm always talking about there's a difference when you're looking at it from a business imperative, or you're looking at it inside of an organization versus if you're doing something outside, because everybody's community and pieces are different. And I feel like there has been evidence, especially lately, that there's so much confusion as to what inclusion means. And I did do some research, and I was looking back at your Harvard Business Review and talking about product and Mattel, and it kind of touched me. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about like the real impact. This isn't, even though, you know, there's a moral side, there's the other side, but it really equates to actual numbers. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about that. And again, I will put it in the show notes, the link to the Harvard Business Review.
Okay, yeah. So I won't repeat then what's in the Harvard Business Review, but I will kind of share a few things with you. So firstly, inclusion is everyone. So well, let's just put that out there. And certainly, you know, the misrepresentation of what DE&I stands for, it needs to be rectified, and hopefully in this new historical cultural moment that we are experiencing over the last 48 hours, our opportunity to take back the narrative is even stronger than it was, you know, just 2 days ago. So more on us from that, by the way. But from the business imperative side, we are actually now, so the Harvard Business Review obviously shows companies like Sephora and other companies who have been very intentional about their inclusion practices in terms of the growth that they've experienced, and, you know, and the success that they've had in the marketplace as a result of that. And then you can look at companies, you know, I often say to brands when so there's a few things that come our way. One is, you know, we're so nervous that we're going to end up on the front page because we've done something wrong. And what I often say to brands is, so IMAX, which is our product, literally shows that there are over 80 business practices in support of building an inclusive brand. I think there might be 8 of those practices or 12 of those practices that are about advocacy. So brands don't even have to go as far as advocacy. We've got like 72 practices that they can implement that are all focused on business impact, right? So my point is there's no excuse not to do it. And then the other piece of it is that we've just announced some research around the business impact of inclusion on purchase intent and on engagement. And what was really interesting about that research is that, so there's a few things. One is there is a difference between diversity and inclusion. Diversity without inclusion is not as impactful as inclusion without diversity. So that's one thing. Diversity and inclusion is the most impactful, and you can actually see 3x increase in your purchase intent if you do diversity and inclusion. And people think, like, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, is this a brand for me, right? Like, does this brand talk to me? So we are seeing some incredible research that now justifies the what we've all known, which is that inclusion has huge impact on purchase intent. And then the other thing that I'll throw out, which is not in the HBR article, but I think is relevant, is that, you know, Fenty exists as $1 billion company because cosmetic companies didn't make cosmetics for Black women, you know, period, end of story. So it's a cautionary tale. Tristan Walker, you know, launched Bevel because he couldn't find a single blade quality razor when he was walking down the aisles, because, you know, the trend had gone to 5 and 6 blade razors, and then he ended up selling his business for 50 million or so, an undisclosed amount, to P&G. So our, you know, message really to brands is that it's a cautionary tale if you're not considering the business impact of inclusion.
Love that so much, because, you know, it does equate, but then it also helps tell the narrative of what's going on and the impact. Like and that's what makes it's important, but also to let people know the broader picture of what's really happening. when I moved to Texas from Oregon, and when people ask, why did I move to Waco? When I'm being silly, I'm like, because they don't have hush puppies in Lake Oswego. And I remember, if you've moved or you've lived in different places, when you're trying to identify, you miss your home, you want to make food from your home. And I just wanted catfish and hush puppies. I live in Texas. Like, you can get catfish at any lake, at any golf course in Texas. Like, I don't know why this is an issue. They didn't have it. And it made me feel instantly like I didn't belong here. And I moved 1,200 miles away back to Texas. And there is a catfish king right up the street. So, those kind of things have major impact on the overall economy, but how you feel about the brand. And once you have those experiences and you can free those up where people don't have that as a distraction, they can also do their best work and share within the organization as well.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's $5 trillion in buying power between Hispanic Americans, Black Americans, Indigenous Americans, and Asian Americans. So it's really up to you as a company if you want to tap into that buying power or you don't. I mean, it's pretty simple. I was actually on a panel. I was fortunate enough to be able to go to Cannes, the Cannes Lions Festival of Creativity in June. And I happened to be on a panel with somebody from P&G, and he and I were talking, and he disclosed, so I'm not disclosing anything because he said it publicly, but he disclosed that P&G has analyzed that if they implement more inclusive marketing strategies, that it's a $500 million revenue increase in year one, just in the first year. So that's $1 billion in the second year, right? And there are simple things that companies can do to tap into those historically unrecognized communities, but you have to do it authentically, right? Like that's the other piece of it is I think we've gone down a path of heritage months, which allow companies, and they certainly have a benefit. But we have to be careful that it's not performative and that you're authentically understanding your marketplace, authentically developing products for that marketplace, and then showing up in an authentic way. It's not difficult, but it needs to be done well.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm not going to put you on the spot, and if
Yeah,
you don't
please.
know the answer.
Yeah.
But what you're saying also, in the past week, we saw feedback from John Deere and like Tractor Supply, and I have thoughts around it. I remember early in my practice, I laughed and said, there are some organizations when I first started the industry where I would be like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to implement any DEI. There's some other work that has to be done here first. But you see situations like that. Do you think they too benefit from inclusion, or what do you say to people, organizations like those?
Yeah. Oh, well.
I know. Yeah. Let's all take a heavy sigh real quick,
So I will tell you, I was talking to somebody this morning, and she and I have both now started to get phone calls from companies that want to backtrack on their backtracking. So let's just put that out there, right? And I think, again, it's like, listen, we cannot cave to political pressure when we know that we have an opportunity to do the right thing for our businesses, right? I mean, that's just and like that's really the most important thing. And so it's for me, very short-sighted what Tractor Supply did and what John Deere has done, because the makeup in this country, the racial diversity in this country is inevitable. It does not matter if a presidential nominee or a governor or the Heritage Foundation, with Project 2025 wants to change what our country looks like. At the end of the day, there is an inevitability to what the country is going to be, right? And so let's just, I mean, if you're a business, and I feel like seasoned executives understand that, like if you're a business, you have to embrace what the country that you're in and what the reality is. I don't care if you believe in the moral imperative. Obviously, I would like for that to be the case. But at the end of the day, there is a business imperative to inclusion. And so it's very short-sighted to, make these far-reaching statements. Because listen, at the end of the day, and I'm going to predict this here and now, Tractor Supply and John Deere are going to have to backtrack because fundamentally they have consumers that reflect a different makeup than the consumers that they're reacting to, right? And it's all, kind of back to your point, Jackie, the misrepresentation around DE&I, right? I mean, there is, if you really understand what DE&I means, you would know that it includes absolutely everyone. And it's actually very funny because I was having a conversation with a few people yesterday. We're actually working on an inclusive media and marketing practice that we think, should, quite frankly, replace what is out there from a multicultural perspective and, general market. And we made a joke that, the new majority, right, there's going to be a new majority, and it's going to be our job to make sure that the current existing minority, the current existing majority, who will end up being the minority, are then going to have to be included and make sure that we're, kind of targeting that. So things change, right? Like, listen, in the last 48 hours, we have seen a huge shift in this country. I mean, it's unbelievable, the shift that happened in 48 hours. It's a real, I think, lesson for all of us and for companies especially, that you have to stay the course when it's the right thing to do. You have to stay the course, and you have to really believe in what you're doing and understand why you're doing it and know what your goals and objectives are and go after those goals and objectives. And not let the chatter, right, like impact your business. Because I don't know if I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it. If you're a CEO and you don't believe in building an inclusive company or an inclusive brand, you shouldn't be a CEO.
Right. Tell it. Talk
Agreed.
about it, Cheryl. I mean, and like you're talking about seeing this major shift, seeing this go over, and backtracking on their backtracking. The first thing I thought about, I was like, how are they not having a walkout of employees? Because you just rejected how many people that work there. What happened to the psychological safety, the people that are at work that saw that major stance? And I was just hurt for them, because the economy is not like where you can walk across the street and get another job, and you have families. And how do you explain that to your parents or your cousins or your aunties? Like, why are you staying at that organization? There is so much impact, and it was short-sighted. And I think they did listen to those things politically, but I can understand also, if politics is telling me I can't have a DEI person in my organization because I'm a public funded, organization, it makes it difficult to know in what direction to fight in those situations.
Yeah, listen, it's complicated. It's clearly complicated, because if it wasn't, it would just be. It shouldn't be complicated, right? I mean, it shouldn't be complicated. Equity for all should just be a given. That's the country that we strive for, and it should not be complicated. But as you say, people have jobs, and them leaving is not, really hurting anyone but themselves. And so they're trying to figure out, how do you stick it out in a company that doesn't support you, right? I believe that at some point, this will change. I mean, and I don't know, I'm gonna die fighting. I don't know, because it's just crazy. Like, I don't even know sometimes what we're arguing about. I mean, I just don't even know what we're arguing about. We have one of our members is Milk Pep, and they're actually like the USDA, like the dairy, like got milk, right? And I was talking to the CEO there, and she told me that there was it was fascinating. I don't know anything about golf. I don't do anything with golf. but she told me that men, if you play in the P and G, what's it, the PG golf thing, whatever it is, right? Okay, say again. The PGA, right? The PGA golf thing. I've got P and G on my mind. The PGA golf thing that men don't have to pay, but if you're a woman and you play in the women's version of it, you have to pay.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, it's just silliness. Like, why, right? So, there's just so many things that that don't make sense, right? And we just need to start having it make sense. So the other, I think the other thing is, I understand that there is a reality and there are some people out there that just don't want to see progress. We get that, right? And we also get that they're very well funded and can bring lawsuits against whomever they want because of that funding. But there are absolutely ways to do the work without getting into those kinds of, issues around lawsuits, etc. And by the way, I mean, it's kind of back to, sorry, I'm on a little bit of a ramble here, but it's kind of back to the affirmative action thing, right? The overturning of affirmative action was very squarely about universities, but it had a ripple effect on companies, right? Because they started to get concerned that there were going to be lawsuits, etc. Kenji Yoshino, who's a professor at NYU, talks a lot about, and I'm sure you've heard about him, talks a lot about the work that you can do despite the overturning of affirmative action. There is a lot that companies can still do to become inclusive companies, and from our perspective, that's why we created IMAX, right? Because IMAX focuses on the business. It shows you the business practices that you need to implement, and it gives you a framework on how you do that. And you don't even have to have a DE&I conversation in some respects, right? Not that we don't think you should, but you almost don't even have to, because it's really based on business practices and the opportunity that those offer you. So
I have so many questions right now. So I am going to talk about the last 48 hours and ask you a couple of insider marketing questions. So, people are speculating that Joe Biden did a very smart marketing move by announcing that he was stepping down, or stepping out of the race when he did. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what do you personally think? Do you think that was a strategic move, or do you just think that happened to be the timing when the decision was made?
I mean, like nobody knows, right? What I will say is that I hope that that it was very strategic. And if it was incredibly brilliant. Certainly following, the convention that came before, and, I mean, there are a million reasons why it was really good. It was a slow Sunday. There was no news going on. The vice president had the opportunity to just literally just become the news. And I feel like it was strategic because for the first time in a long time, I felt like the Democratic Party all knew what they needed to do to get behind a single person to, kind of win the election. And so for me, I don't think we should underestimate President Biden, albeit he might be older now and kind of coming to the end of his term. I don't think we should underestimate him, and I don't think we should underestimate the people that he surrounds himself with. Because, I would imagine, and I don't think we should underestimate our, vice president. I mean, right. So, yeah, I think that it was an incredibly brilliant move. So, and I will say that Bridge is obviously we're not a political organization. But when we are fundamentally being attacked by one candidate, well, then we have to, fight against that attack, because it's fundamental to our philosophy, what we believe, and our business. So, so clearly there's an opportunity for us to, to support what's right, as opposed to necessarily even kind of political parties.
Got it. So, I want to back up to the around Christmas time and before then, when companies like Target and a few others got rid of different, like they got rid of some of the pride clothing and things like this. And, you know, and they obviously had been a company that was pretty staunchly left and progressive and all of these things. So, you know, and even, you know, the examples we just gave about Tractor Supply, et cetera. Do you think that was a political thing where it was, hey, we think that Trump might win, so we're going to now let the win kind of carry us? Or do you think that was truly just they got that much backlash that they felt that that was the right move to make?
Yeah, I mean, again, you know, it's so right. It's so complicated. We're not in the we're not in the, you know, in their meeting rooms having these conversations, understanding what the impacts are. Target has historically done an incredibly great job. Not only, I think, at what I would maybe even consider some of the pride stuff to be a little bit more performative, but they have created clothing, right, for kids that have sensory issues, so that they feel comfortable in those clothing, in those clothes. They're very intentional about what the in-store experience is, because I've spent quite a bit of time with Target and talking to them, and they're intentional about how they come up with their advertising. I don't agree with their decision, because I don't think we should, you know, I think at a certain point your companies have to know who they are. And if they fundamentally believe in supporting the LGBTQIA community, they need to support it no matter who says don't, right? So I personally don't necessarily agree with their decision, but I would, knowing who Target is, and for me, Target's a little bit different than the Tractor Supply, right? They're knowing how committed they have been. They must, one can hope that there was a real business reason for what they did. But again, you know, I would have preferred that they didn't do it regardless. I think one of the pieces that is very complicated is when people's safety is at risk. And from what I read and from what I learned about that situation, it might have been an issue of their employee safety that kind of rose to the top and was the reason for them making that decision ultimately. In which case you can understand, you know, you might not like it, but you can kind of understand it. So we live in a very complicated time, and our employee safety must come first for sure, right? So you know, it's unfortunate that people would kind of go crazy about you know, a t-shirt that shows it's like, you know, I mean, you know, you don't believe in you don't believe in being gay, don't be gay. I mean, you just choose differently, right? So, but you don't have to tell somebody else not to be, right? So
but that's why it's so important. Like, I don't work for Bridge, but I think it's so important to have an organization like Bridge, a very detailed, structured format, like this is where we're going. Because so oftentimes, if you're doing piecemeal work and it's not unclear, it's hard to have a rally behind it. Like, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, this is where we are in this stage, this is what the outcome and the impact. And I think that's a primary difference between just a, you know, social narrative and a business narrative, like understanding like, no, this is a business plan, we're launching it with strategic expectations at the end of it.
yeah.
And then when you're doing this, it's hard. The metric is hard. It's like, oh, sorry, there was a tweet that went on Thursday, so our numbers are down. You know, it's not,
Right.
it is complicated.
Yeah, I mean, you know, listen, the IMAX framework puts everyone on the same playing field within your organization, and it shows everybody where you are, right? And it's really, it's not to, you know, some companies are like, well, are you going to show, are you going to share it? It's obviously not. This is proprietary to your individual company, and it's really not about naming and shaming. It's about how can we help you develop a strategy that is inclusive, that ultimately brings you business growth. And understanding where you are is always the first step in good business, right? And having data to back that up. The other thing that I would, you know, just kind of just, I don't know, it keeps coming in my head is that, you know, DE&I practitioners are really skilled practitioners, right? You're not a DE&I person if you're Black or you're Asian or you're Hispanic or you're part of the LGBTQ community. You are a DE&I leader when you are skilled to be a DE&I leader, regardless of what your your gender or racial identity or sexual orientation is. Certainly your lived experience might contribute to it, but these are skilled people that really understand. I have been incredibly lucky to watch our chief diversity officers that are on the board, because I have learned that there is such a difference between the lens of a DE&I leader than the lens of somebody who just happens to be part of a different community, right? And so we should not underestimate I believe that there are gems within companies, and I have seen the power when marketing and DE&I come together, and that unlock in that kind of collaboration happens. I've seen the power in what you can kind of accomplish together. So I don't know why I wanted to bring that up, but it was just kind of in the back of my head. I realized it wasn't a question, but I feel like it kind of blends into everything we've been talking about.
Yeah, I actually that's one of my questions is also, what are some good examples that you have of when companies get it right? So, when you do blend that chief diversity officer, the marketing team, you don't need to name specific brands or anything like that, but what does that look like, and how does that come about?
Inclusion is intentional. And so if you bring intentionality, if you're part of the marketing team and you're not talking to your chief diversity officer, I don't believe can be a successful marketer in today's culture and in today's opportunity. So I would really challenge marketers to seek out your chief diversity officers, and I would also challenge the chief diversity officers to understand their business more and not to solely focus on, talent is fundamentally the foundation upon which you can build inclusive companies and brands. But they have a huge opportunity to understand the business impact that they can bring. So, I challenge the people, and I think that's why our board is so incredible, because you literally can just sit there and you can watch the learning that happens between the two different communities, and somehow it just works and it blends. And we have our events that we bring everyone together, and we focus on both what the chief diversity officer's role is and what the CMO's role is in building these inclusive brands and companies. So for me, it's an imperative that there is that kind of collaboration and unlock happening. And I'm actually willing to even to talk about certain brands. So I bring up Sephora because it just is such a great example. Their global chief marketing officer and their chief diversity officer. I don't know. I have a feeling they talk every day because that's the relationship they have, right? And when we're working with them, and they actually piloted the IMAX program. They were one of our pilot brands. They were in such lockstep that they could finish each other's sentences. Like there was nothing where there was there was no disconnect. They fundamentally understood how important that connection was. And as a result of that, they have changed their in-store experiences. They understand who their consumers are. They're doing so many things because of that, as a result of that, collaboration. And there are others with, on our board that kind of have that same unlock. So for me, it's an incredibly powerful and underused, I think, opportunity in companies. Sorry, did that answer your question, by the way?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. And I think the follow-up is, going back to Tractor Supply or other folks. I mean, I think we've had, unfortunately, way too many examples in recent years of brands that have not included that chief diversity officer or have made a misstep. What is your advice to folks that, once you have that unfortunate misstep or do something that, isn't really supporting the brand or supporting the folks that are your customers and are your, target audience, if you will, what do you do?
You backtrack on the backtracking. I don't know, call us, we'll help you. Everybody should reconsider those decisions, absolutely and fundamentally. You should understand what the impact of those decisions are on the business. We have considered reaching out to both Tractor Supply and John Deere, and we'll likely do that to offer our help, because that's why we're here, right? Companies are going to make mistakes. They're going to make missteps. The good companies are those that recognize the mistakes that they've made, and then, figure out how you're going to fix it. And if you don't fix it, well, then, what happens in the future is kind of your responsibility, right? Again, we're back to the cautionary tale. So I would say, rethink it, reconsider, and find a way to do it differently. I mean, if it wasn't working, then find a way to do it differently. And as I say, Bridge is here. We're here to help. Like, we are not here to attack, right? Like, we do a lot of work behind the scenes. We get a lot of companies calling behind, us that we never ever talk about. Just recently, a couple of weeks ago, a brand did a misstep, and they called us, and we helped. So, we would never kind of disclose. We don't talk about it. We just do the work. We celebrate the successes for sure, though.
I was gonna say that too, because I was shocked the other day. I think it was Wells Fargo, and you remember the deal with Wells Fargo a couple of years ago, and they had a big major thing, and it was somebody, they wrote this article, and they was talking about this award for like a diversity and inclusion and all of these things. And I said, well, look at y'all, Wells Fargo. I haven't heard about y'all since you made that mistake. And everybody, was starting to, cancel y'all. But I do think it's important, like you said, of getting somebody who knows this work and understands it. There's professionals, because you have to be resilient. You're not going to scare DEI professional, because we're all like, people try to do that every day. It doesn't work. And the other part is understanding these scenarios that you can get back and say, when you're ready, look, like, these are the things, this is what we stand behind, but we expect people to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Just like in any department, there's no different, but it's important, again, to have a plan in the business imperative to be able to push those things forward. I wanted to ask, what do you think what's a common misconception from organizations when they're asking you what they need to do in order to implement one of your programs?
Yeah, well, listen, I think the common misconception about DE&I is that it's about race. So we'll just put that out there, and it's not, right? We have, which we're learning a lot about, is, kind of differences in ability and accessibility and all of that kind of stuff. So we actually start there, and Bridge is going to come out very soon with some definitions. So I'll just sidetrack for 1 second. Bridge is an acronym for belonging, representation, inclusion, diversity. The G is for growth, and then the E is for equity, which is obviously our ultimate goal. And so we have now created definitions for each one of those pillars, right? For each one of those ideas, because everybody thinks of inclusion, they just think of it differently. At the very beginning of when Bridge was formed, I asked for our board to send us their definitions, and nobody had the same definition. So part of our job and our role is to try to standardize some of this stuff so that we're all working towards the same outcome with the same approach or similar approach, right? And then we can start to hold companies accountable and measure the success, right? Because then you've got kind of this, your benchmarks are the same, right? Like, we're all working kind of with a standard, which is, again, part of what IMEX is all about, and with our goal of turning inclusion, quite frankly, into a brand metric. So one is we dispel the notion that DE&I is about race. And then the second one is we talk about the fact that inclusion is not just about workplace practices, but it's about marketplace practices too, or in addition, and maybe even, and as importantly, for sure, and that you need to understand what your marketplace practices are in order to build a really inclusive brand and an inclusive company. That's where that's where, if you start with that, then you're starting to think about your organization as a whole and not just kind of silo, right? Because, I mean, we know, right? DEI has been kind of like put in a corner over here and told to fix things. And that's not how it works. Inclusion is everyone's job. Every single person in an organization's responsibility. It's not the chief diversity officer's responsibility. They can obviously bring their skill and their lens to what it can look like and how to approach it and the right policies and processes maybe, but it's everyone's job. And, and I think that's one of the things that we are really trying to dispel. It's not a single person's job.
Agreed. I think that's, from a culture perspective, it's that, whole idea of, whoever the least inclusive or, the person that's not actually following the culture, that's actually what your culture is. So you need everybody on board, everyone kind of going in the same direction. So Cheryl, would love for you to share a little bit about the IMAX program and kind of what you do with companies that you take through that program.
Okay. So, I'll give you a little bit of background on how we got to IMAX, because it may be helpful just to kind of ground it. We partnered with an academic team from Emory University, the University of Georgia, and Indiana University. And I have been very fortunate to work with Dr. Omar Rodrigo Villa from Emory University along my career. And I called him and I said, Omar, what do we, now that we're about to launch Bridge, before we launch it, I want to know what is the research that we need in order to help brands build inclusive brands and companies. And so what we really wanted to focus on was understanding what are the business practices that contribute to equities or inequities in the marketplace. We focused our research on the marketplace because we knew that there would be dependencies on the workplace. And there was obviously a lot of research out there already, from a workplace, an inclusive workplace perspective. And so what we did was we interviewed over 50 CMOs, CDOs, and CEOs to understand, from their perspective. We correlated and aggregated other research that was out there. So we had we had qualitative and quantitative research. And what the research revealed were these 80 plus business practices across the 5 pillars of an organization. And the 5 pillars are organizational practices, marketing management, commercial practices, which is your product development, communications, and then advocacy. And if you think of it in a little bit of a different way, it's like, how do you lay the foundation? How do you see your marketplace? How do you serve your marketplace, right, with the products? Then how do you show up in the marketplace? And then obviously advocacy is kind of next. What we didn't want research that just showed that. We wanted to make it actionable because we're all about how do you actually drive change? And so we turned that research into an assessment of inclusion maturity. And so IMAX actually stands for Inclusion Maturity Assessment and Capability Building, right? Because it's important to understand where you are, but then it's important to understand what are the capabilities that you need in order to increase your inclusion maturity. And so that's really fundamentally what IMAX is. It's steeped in that research. It is now an assessment that companies can take. It's not a complicated cultural assessment that exists out there that a lot of companies do, where every single person in the company needs to take the assessment, and it takes 2 years or a year and a half to get the things, and it costs a lot of money. For us, it's 25 to 30 people in a company take the assessment. They represent the different pillars. They represent different seniorities. Obviously, we want, kind of racial diversity, gender diversity, etc. And then we have an automated tool that once the assessment gets input into that tool, it automatically shows you your report on where you are from an inclusion maturity perspective. So you get an overall brand inclusion maturity score, and then you get a score for every single one of the 80 business practices that are included. Once you have the assessment done, then it's really important to us for us to help prioritize where you focus, because you're not going to focus on 80 business practices at once. It's unrealistic. So we understand the company's business. We see where the opportunities are and where we think that you can bridge the gaps, potentially, with high impact, low effort. We look at all of that. And then the last component, which is the beauty of having Bridge as a trade group, is that we are now starting to build best practices around where we know the bigger gaps are showing up already. And so, as I mentioned, we have this inclusive media and marketing coalition of companies where we're looking at, how do we fix what's happening with general market and multicultural marketing. We have our chief diversity officers already working on best practices with talent management and retention and acquisition, gaps. And so, we're only 2 years old, so we have a lot of work to do. But that's how it kind of all comes together, where companies then start to build your capabilities. The other thing that I would just add is that we also understand you can also take IMAX. So there's two things. You can take IMAX both at the company level and at the brand level. So if you're a company that has a portfolio of brands, and it would be overwhelming to do IMAX at the company level, like, for example, Campbell's, they wanted to compare 2 of their brands. And so we can do IMAX at the brand level as well. And what was interesting from Campbell's perspective was that one of their brands was more inclusive than the other, that they, but so they have a core competency in their company, but they weren't applying it across the brands. So they now are, kind of looking at how you do that. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is we understand that every company is a little bit different. If you're a retailer, you're going to be different than if you're a CPG, right? And so we do kind of modify the assessment to make sure that it applies to your business.
Very cool. So my question to you, well, first, how do folks find you? How do they get a hold of you?
Oh, you're so nice. Thank you. So I am Sheryl, Sheryl, at wearebridge.com. We couldn't, bridge.com was too expensive as a URL. So
I can only imagine. Yes. Yeah.
so when we were a startup, there was no way. So we did wearebridge.com. So that's the URL as well. So if you go to our website, it's wearebridge.com, and feel free to email me, Sheryl at wearebridge.com. So
awesome. Very cool. And what are 1 or 2 things that you want to make sure folks heard during this episode?
Wow. So stay the course. When there's no need to panic. Inclusion is good for business. It's good for business growth. Stay the course, figure out where your opportunities are, and then prioritize against those opportunities. And, make a commitment to building an inclusive brand. One of the things that we didn't talk about was the Gen Z population that is absolutely going to demand more inclusion from everything that companies do. So, for me, it's really stay the course. And then I think the second thing is really understand where you are. If it's not through IMAX, do it, figure out some other way to understand. But really understanding what your business practices are that are going to contribute to that potential growth through inclusion is essential. And it's really important to know where you are, to know where you're going, to know where you can go, right? So figure out the data and make sure that you understand it.
Awesome. Thank you. Jackie, what you got?
Don't be afraid to backtrack on your backtrack.
Oh my gosh. Yes. That was what I was
Right?
going to say. That was awesome.
No, Katie, you always make me go first. If you would just go first,
Yes, I know.
then I can say
No.
that. But
Yeah.
I love it. Well, and I think for me, the pieces that, when you make a misstep, call you, but then also, making sure that, you are thinking about what is that moral imperative and how does that align to the business imperative? And how do you think about kind of all of that together? I think that's something that there is that disconnect. And, you talking about the CMO and the CDO talking every day and, connecting every day, I think that's something that is just, most folks wouldn't think that would be a critical thing to do. And it absolutely is. So I love that as well. So This has been great. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. And again, folks, we'll put some notes in the episode. In the episode notes, we will share the link to her website, all this good stuff, so you can get a hold of Cheryl. And we want to thank you for joining us today. This is Katie Van Horn.
And this is Jackie Clayton.